Welcome to our Grow Native webinar, Dispelling Myths of Native Gardening with panelists Sajo Abdallah, Eric Eaton, Dr. Nina Fogel, and Scott Woodbury. My name is Amanda Lance Ramrup, and I am the Events and Communications Coordinator for the Missouri Prairie Foundation and Grow Native program. Thank you for joining us for the next webinar of our 2025 series for a panel discussion designed to demystify approaches to native landscape design and styles, maintenance, challenge assumptions around pollinators, small mammals, and insects, and address your questions live. Before we continue, I'll review today's procedure, which is a little different than our normal one when we have presentations. Our program begins with a short welcome to our panelists, where we can hear some insights into their own stories and what topics they are positioned to tackle today. This welcome and introduction segment will last about 15 minutes and then be followed by the Q&A panel discussion facilitated by Lily Germeroth, our MPF's Conservation Program Associate. Throughout the next hour, we invite listeners to please type your questions for the panel into the Q&A section on your Zoom screen. You'll find that at the bar at the bottom of your Zoom window. If you have a question for a specific panelist, please include their name in your submission. We've also prepared a pick list of common misconceptions and questions we've heard over the years to pull from as time allows. Thanks in advance for your thoughtful live submissions. All who have registered can look forward to receiving a follow-up email tomorrow with a link to this recording and more resources. Now I'd like to welcome each of our panelists, starting with Sajo Abdallah. Sajo currently works as a private lands biologist for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's Partners for Fish and Wildlife program. She is a Texas native and received her Bachelor of Science in Animal Science with a minor in Conservation Biology from Sam Houston State University. Her current position allows her the opportunity to interact with the public through outreach events, while also bringing conservation practices to private lands by helping homeowners build pollinator habitats in their yards. As her day-to-day, Sajo assists Columbia, Missouri residents in crafting gardens that are both aesthetically beautiful and ecologically sustainable through natives. She is passionate about plants, pollinators, people, and combining all three to engage the community better. Now, thank you for joining us, Sajo. I'll give you a couple minutes just to talk a little bit more about yourself and why you're here.
Awesome. Thank you, Amanda. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. Like Amanda said, my name is Sajo Abdallah. I do work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as a private lands biologist. Most of my sort of day-to-day work revolves around coordinating our Como Wild Yards program. So it's a backyard pollinator program designed to help homeowners in the Columbia, Missouri area with making their lawns more sustainable. Usually that's through planting native species, removing invasives, but that could also be stormwater management practices, adding birdhouses, things like that. And while doing that program and while doing those consultations, I've heard from folks some of the things that they hear just from neighbors. The homeowners themselves might be super excited about planting natives and landscaping with natives, but their neighbors maybe have a little bit of a different idea and different kind of opinions. So that's part of the reason why this panel was super attractive to me. And my topic specifically is about small mammals in more urbanized landscapes. So any questions about that, please direct them towards me. But thank you so much again for asking me to be on this panel. I'm very, very excited to hear your questions.
Okay, thanks, Sajo. I'd also like to mention that Grow Native is partnering with Como Wild Yards for a garden tour later this month. It's already at max capacity because our promotion was solid and everybody was excited, but I'll share more on it later. There's a chance to join a waiting list. Next, let's welcome Eric R. Eaton. Eric is an entomologist, writer, speaker, and lauded internet bug guy on his blog, Bug Eric. Eric's newest book, Bug Watching: The Art, Joy, and Importance of Observing Insects, is available for purchase now through your choice of book retailer. It's great to have you aboard, Eric.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm more of a writer than I am. I'm a writer who knows a lot about insects. Let's put it that way. So I'll do my best to answer what comes up. I'm going to be taking notes myself, honestly, because my partner and I are trying to rewild our own yard. But right now the squirrels are pretty much doing that. So somewhere between chaos, that kind of anarchy, right, and intention is a happy medium. And I think that's what I'm hoping to learn myself out of this thing. But mostly I want to thank you for coming. If you have an interest in this kind of thing and are intending to do things, I already applaud you because it's a pretty new concept, right? To rewild, especially urban and suburban places. And because of that, pardon the pun, but we're still working the bugs out. It's not a one solution fits all proposition. And so we get, fads like no mow May or leave the leaves, when in fact it's a little more nuanced than that. We even get conflicting advice on how to do really basic things like kill our lawn if we want to replace it with something else. Um, so from the perspective of insects, I see a lot of folks. I spend a lot of time online in social media, and I see a lot of people wanting kind of to have their own free range zoo of their favorite insects. And that's not what this movement is about. And the goal is to have as complete an ecosystem as possible, and that means you will have some undesirables. And I'm here to help you learn how to live with those, maybe. But yeah, my advice would be just to be patient. This stuff takes time. It can take years to see the result you want. And given climate change and it's a drought one year and a deluge the next, there's a lot of things that are out of your control. So don't think you're necessarily doing things wrong. So thank you for coming. Thank you for the invitation to join. I'm truly honored.
Oh, you're welcome, Eric. We're happy to have you. And it sounds like we're going to be able to get a lot of questions tackled related to insects. So thank you for your time. Next, I'd like to welcome Nina Fogel. Nina manages data on species of conservation concern as the Missouri Department of Conservation's Natural Heritage Database Specialist. She received her PhD at St. Louis University, where she studied bee diversity in residential native plant gardens. Welcome, Nina.
Hi, thank you all. So yeah, I'm at MDC now, but really I'm going to be talking about the research for my PhD, where I studied bee diversity in home gardens enrolled in the Bring Conservation Home Program, which is a native plant garden certification program in St. Louis. And I was really interested at looking at the bee diversity in these native plant gardens. And I looked at a bunch of different factors. I looked at where the garden was located and, the urban suburban matrix. I looked at land cover surrounding the garden. I even walked around every garden's neighborhood and looked at the landscaping practices of the neighbors of the yard. And what I found, the most important thing if you wanted to attract bee diversity to your yard, was increasing plant diversity. As plant diversity increased, or flowering plant diversity, bee diversity increased. So this really turned me into a believer in native plant gardens and the belief that they can really support bees and other organisms. And through this process, I visited, I think I've visited over 150 native plant gardens in the St. Louis area. I've talked with tons of homeowners. I've learned so much about gardening from them, but also some of the preconceived things they have and the misconceptions and the issues they've run into. So I'm happy to answer any questions I can today about, insects and native plant gardening and how it benefits the ecosystem, as well as answer some things I've learned from talking to others and also the journey I've had in installing a native plant garden in my yard. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Nina. We are super lucky to have two individuals with certifying programs here who have experience with certifying programs here. So, and that's not all. We also are joined by Scott Woodbury. Scott is a designer, horticulturalist, writer, speaker, and owner of Cacalia Design and Wilding. He received his BS degree in horticulture at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and has worked at various high-profile public gardens, including the Whitmere Wildflower Garden at Shaw Nature Reserve near St. Louis City in Missouri. He currently serves as advisor to the horticultural program of St. Louis Community College. He's with Grow Native and Wild Ones St. Louis. Scott serves on the planning committees for the Partners for Native Landscaping Conference and the Small Grants Program for the Deer Creek Watershed Alliance and MSD Project Clear. Scott, it's great to have you.
It's great to be here. Thanks, Amanda. I appreciate being with all of you. When you have a panel of more than one person, you get perspectives that you wouldn't otherwise have, and I really do respect that. It brings up great conversation. I hope that everybody can think about this and come up with questions of your own and jot them down. So don't forget to ask those questions. When I think about myths, in native landscaping, one thing always rises to the surface, and that is that native plants are weeds. I see it in writing. I hear it coming out of people's mouths frequently. I was told as a speaker one time that your native plants are not going to show up in our community to my face. I was at a garden center not too long ago. I like to go over to Greenscape Gardens in St. Louis. They've got lots of native plants. And this lady had a beautiful plant in her hands. She was picking it out and she was going to buy it. And I noticed that it was a plant that I had purchased just in the fall last year. And so I commented on what a great plant that was, that I was really happy with it. And we talked for a few minutes and she said, well, you know, I'm not going to have any native plants in my garden because they are all weeds. And then I couldn't help but notice, but I didn't say anything, that the plant that she was bringing home was a native plant that had a cultivar name. And furthermore, this Amsonia taberni montana cultivar called Stormcloud was one that was discovered in nature. It was discovered growing wild in a creek. And so, you know, I do think that people really give native plants a bad rap. I think it's really about how the plants are used. Some people can do it in a really messy way, and messy can be good, but it's not understood by many people. And some people can use native plants in a very conventional way, and then you look at it and you won't even know that it's a native garden, perhaps. The other myth that I think that we're going to touch on is, you know, this idea that, like this person at the garden center thought that, you know, if it's a cultivar, then it's a good plant for my garden. And then on the other side, you know, if it's a cultivar, then a lot of people think that it's a bad plant for the garden. But in reality, all cultivars are different. We generally don't have enough information about whether a plant is coming from a wild situation, whether it's propagated from seed. Many cultivars are propagated from seed, or whether it's just some weird hybrid between plants that are so far apart geographically. Anyway, I'll stop there and we'll move back to you, Amanda, and let's go.
Right on. Thanks for getting us started, everybody. And thanks for making it time for us today. The rest of our time is going to be dedicated to the questions that you guys are going to be submitting live through the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and the lists that we've already have been collecting. I'm going to go ahead and pass things over to Lily, and she is going to do her best to direct questions when you guys recommend that you want to have your question answered by a specific person, or we're just going to offer them up to the entire panel to be able to kind of chime in at will. We're kind of going into this like native gardening, where part of the fun is the wild nature of things. So I'll go ahead and give things over to you, Lily. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. I'll start with kind of a clear-cut one to get us started, asking about how do I learn which bees are in my garden and how do I even start? So maybe Eric and Nina can chime in on how to break into this world of tiny little intricate things.
Eric, go for it, and then I'll add on anything.
Okay. Well, one of the easier routes to go, I mean, well, for starters, bee diversity is way greater than you would think. I mean, there are, you know, upwards, I think, of 900 native bees throughout the United States. And we're kind of in an epicenter, honestly, where the prairie meets the eastern deciduous forest. So our diversity is pretty good. That said, it's difficult to go to a book and be able to figure out what kind of bee you're looking at. There are some good reference books out there, but I found for myself even to go online is faster and easier because you get input from bee specialists like Nina and others who have worked with bees, you know, throughout their lives. So I would go to a place like iNaturalist. If you can get a picture of your critter, put it up to iNaturalist. That's both a web platform and an app for your phone. and you can upload your observation is how they term it. And then you will get input for well, first of all, it'll give you suggestions on what the artificial intelligence thinks it is. That can be way off the mark. So you might just want to put it at bees and then let it go from there. And so then experts will come in and offer their insights as to what you have there. There's another site called bugguide.net, which functions similarly. Sometimes it takes a lot longer to get feedback, though, on your observation there. But if somebody does give you an answer, then you can go to Bug Guide and find out more about the species. So that's how I usually go about it. I try to get an image, put it online in a community where people who know more than I do will see it.
Yeah, I'll just say, so we have about 456 species, or last time I heard in Missouri. Most of them are really hard to identify unless you have them under a microscope. But as Eric said, iNaturalist is a fantastic resource. You post your photos, me and other people will often look at them. Also, I used to co-run a program called Shutterbee, and we made a dichotomous key. It's a visual dichotomous key to bees it's in St. Louis, but it will really work for most of the eastern US minus bumblebees. And that will help you by using the visuals of what the bee looks like, help figure it out to genus. So I'll make sure to send the guide we made to Amanda, and it will all be sent out afterwards. But I would say iNaturalist is a fantastic resource, not just for bees, but wasps, really any organism you see in your yard or anywhere else. Take a photo, upload it, and there's a fantastic community on iNaturalist that's happy to help ID it, but also help you learn how to ID them yourselves and contribute back to the community, which is really one of my favorite parts of the iNaturalist platform.
Great. Thank you so much. Now we have a couple of questions about site establishment or preparation of a site, particularly, and this is for all the panelists, with a focus on Bermuda grass. There's a couple questions of how do I overcome a lawn of Bermuda grass? Does black plastic really work? Does cardboard really work? Can we get some perspectives on that?
I'll just jump in and sorry,
Yeah.
because I've been dealing with Bermuda grass just recently. Bermuda grass is really tough. I was developing a project at Crestwood City Hall with Angie Weber, and we had a contractor sod cut the Bermuda grass out of this area. We thought that we did a good job of it. You know, it's great. You can just cut the sod out. It's relatively organic, no chemicals involved. And then 2 weeks later, maybe a week later, it just started growing back. So we didn't get the roots out deep enough, and you really have to dig it fairly deep if you're going to use a sod cutter. Digging it by hand is another way to do it, but that's really labor intensive on a site preparation where you're starting from scratch. You really can dig it up, perhaps. And chemicals can be tricky too, because if you use glyphosate, it basically burns it down, and then it resprouts, and then you have to spray it again, and it resprouts. So glyphosate doesn't kill it. The only chemical, if you're going to go that route, that really works is Pylex, and Pylex costs about $400 an ounce. So it's extremely out of reach for anybody. Contractors will use it, but it's just a difficult situation. That's my observation. I say dig it, and dig it deep.
And if I could maybe add on as well, just kind of like personal experiences and the folks that I've talked to when I do my consultations, I will echo, yeah, Bermuda grass is very tough. As far as the cardboard, typically with my program, the Como Wild Yards program, we do recommend that folks use cardboard and mulch. It's a little bit more involved than that. You do have to kind of mow that area down as close as you can get it, apply the cardboard, apply 3 inches of mulch, with the idea being that if you let it sit for at least 90 days, it'll smother out everything that could be underneath. And And just from personal experience, folks have had a lot of success with that. They plant their plugs right into that cardboard. It degrades, so you never have to actually remove it. Once you put the cardboard down, it's there. It adds nutrients into the soil as it's degrading as well. So just kind of as a personal note, from what I've seen, that cardboard and mulch method has worked for quite a few folks that are wanting to plant specifically plugs.
Excellent. If, any other thoughts on site preparation, we can work them in, but thank you for that, Scott and Sajo. Now, and apologies for jumping all over, but yeah, we're in it for the chaos. Now let's address goldenrods. I'd like to replace my too tall and rather aggressive goldenrod. I admit to being prejudiced against cultivars, but I'll believe the experts here, is one of our people who have written in. So maybe Scott can jump in first about using goldenrods in the garden and kind of where it can go aggressive and any thoughts you have.
Well, sure, I'll try. Goldenrods, of course, are a keystone species. Talemy identifies it as having upwards of 90 species of insects that really rely on it. And so I always try to incorporate goldenrods into every single garden that I design. The trick is finding the goldenrod that's really going to work best for the site. Little tiny gardens, it's often a challenge. If it's in full sun, I usually go toward cliff goldenrod. Cliff goldenrod will go to seed, vigorously. So just know that you might be pulling up seedlings. For shady areas, I really like going to zigzag goldenrod or blue stem goldenrod, Solidago caesia or Solidago flexicalis. They can seed around too, but they're not terribly difficult to identify and remove if you want to remove them. For larger landscapes, I do tend to use Solidago rugosa. Rugosa doesn't seem to seed around as much as elm leaf goldenrod, which is Solidago ulmifolia, but it will seed around too. I like it. It's a sturdy plant. It's diehard. It will be in your garden for the long haul. It's a little bit taller. It's going to be approaching 4 feet in height. There is a cultivar called Fireworks. It's a little bit more dramatic in flower, but the straight species is dramatic too. So it's kind of a no-brainer for me. Those are the 4 species that I usually reach out for.
And I'll just add to that. I think the one that just you see on roadsides and such is Solidago canadensis, right? Is that right? Yeah. So like all these, it's a bad genus or whatever. It's usually, well, I'd say none of them are really bad, but there's going to be specific species. They're going to be the one that pops up in your yard. And that might be a native plant, but it's not necessarily a good plant for a small home garden because they can be really aggressive. So if you have if you have Solidago canadensis or some other native plant taking over, like you can remove it, you don't have to keep it in there. You can instead replace it with another species. I think the thing that Solidago is so good at for providing resources to insects and other organisms is just that it flowers so late in the year. So if you're going to pull out that Solidago canadensis, which has just popped up in your yard because it's a pretty aggressive native, try to replace it with something else that flowers late in the year, like another Solidago or a late blooming aster or something like that. Because the goal is to provide, if you really want to make your native plant garden great for pollinators and other organisms, you really need to provide resources throughout the season. So that means having things that are blooming late in the year.
Great, thank you. Related to this idea of controlling or removing plants from a planting once it's already going, we had questions about controlling common milkweed, Asclepias syriaca. So could maybe again Scott or Nina or Sajo or Eric comment on the editing of a garden, maybe year after year?
Just very briefly, I always encourage the use of common goldenrod, and the reason is that it's so easy to edit. Wherever it sprouts up where you don't want it, you can just tug it out of the ground. It will continue to resprout, but it's such an easy plant. Let it get up to some height, maybe 3 or 4 feet, and then yank it, or cut it, or clip it. You really can encourage it to go where you want it to go and discourage it to go where you don't want it to go. It's one of those relatively easy plants, especially if it's in a little bit of morning shade or afternoon shade. A little bit of shade tends to slow it down. Full sun makes it a little more challenging, but it's still, if you're gardening and paying attention to your garden, you can edit it out just by plucking it out of the ground. That's what I do.
Sorry, one more thing to add. I would say when you're pulling plants, it's the best opportunity to build community and get other people into native plant gardening. Instead of pulling those plants and throw them in the compost bin, try to give them to someone else. I know like St. Louis has this great, it's the only reason I use Facebook. It's the St. Louis Native Plant Swap Facebook group, and it's people just giving away free native plants and say, hey, I just pulled a bunch of, common milkweed. It's on my porch, come grab it, or something like that. So when you're pulling those plants, give them to a neighbor, give them to a friend. They're free. If they die, so what? Like there's no sunk cost. So use that opportunity to get other people into native plant gardening by giving them the plants that you don't want.
Nice, thank you. Let's bring it back to bugs for a second. We had some questions that of folks that had noticed insects laying eggs on their plants, and maybe I'm assigning an air of worry to them, but maybe Eric or Nina, you could address this maybe worry of insects eating plants, or do we ever have to worry about insects that we should remove from our native gardens? I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Okay. Well, if they're eating your plants, that's what's supposed to happen. Honestly, it's maybe, I mean, we have to learn a new level of tolerance for cosmetic damage. I mean, in my experience, most plants are able to rebound very well, even after near complete defoliation. I mean, I've noticed that with trees in particular, but I'll defer to somebody who knows plants better about that. But there's no question that yeah, insects can do really ugly damage to things. Right now, we're dealing at our place with Japanese beetles, which have well, not only are they not native, but they have a broad palate. So basically everything's on the menu, and how they consume it varies with the toughness of the leaf. But basically, I mean, you do want to have caterpillars, for example, gnawing on your oak leaves or on some of your red bud, and some herbs as well, because then that's how you get moths and butterflies and the things that pollinate on that end of things. Plus, you're feeding birds that way. That's especially important during migrations, but it helps year round, frankly, to be able to provide food for breeding birds in particular. So yeah, I empathize with the desire to have a nice looking garden, but again, the goal is to promote an ecosystem, and sometimes that's not very pretty, unfortunately. So it's basically your own decision what you're comfortable with, and the more you can tolerate, the better on for the sake of the greater good.
Great, thank you. A related concept, but there was a question of what about ticks? I've heard the explanation that lawns must be short and clean because of the risk for ticks. Does anyone have any thoughts on this?
I don't think it's necessarily to do with lawns. Personally, I don't know a ton about ticks, especially in more urban areas. I think it's more to do with having other mammals that are going to help spread ticks around. But I don't think a short lawn is going to to stop ticks. They're just kind of always going to be a part of, you know, us humans battle with nature. So I think the best thing is just prevention. So making sure you're, you know, if you're out a lot in tall grasses, you're, you know, using some form of bug spray, you're maybe washing your clothes in permethrin, you're doing chick checks. That's going to be a much better defense. And then, you know, cutting, you know, having super short lawn everywhere.
Yeah, I would concur with that. And a overarching issue is that we've been conditioned by the pest control industry and by other, you know, big businesses that you know, this is what we need to do to deal with ticks, when it really does come down to literally looking after each other, inspecting each other after you get back from your hike or whatever, and taking precautions, as Nina suggested, before you go out. You know, applying DEET or some other kind of repellent to your clothing before you go out. Wear long sleeves pants, tuck your pants into your cuffs, that kind of thing. So, and to the point, yes, we've created edge habitat that is very, very attractive to deer and small mammals, and that's maybe more of a problem. That's it actually might help ticks to have more widespread natural habitat than this fragmented habitat we have now. Um, I think we won't know for a long time whether that helps or not, but I think so.
And I just kind of wanted to echo what everyone else has already said. I'm also am not a tick expert by any means. I can only just say my personal experiences. And whenever I do field work, whenever I do my consultations outdoors, whether it's a yard with very short grass or a place with a little bit more of dense vegetation, I've gotten ticks in both. It's kind of just a part of being outdoors, unfortunately. Um, and like Nina and like Eric said, really the only thing to do is just prevention. Making sure that you're looking out for your fellow people, using the bug sprays, checking yourself after you've been outside. But as far as having a shorter sort of lawn, if that will do anything to prevent it, not in my experience.
If I could jump in and say one more thing, a number of you have mentioned white-tailed deer and as a vector of ticks. And this is maybe not what the question was asking, but it certainly relates. From a gardening perspective, from a landscaping perspective, I find that in areas where there are high populations of deer, it is extremely difficult to get a garden established. And so deer fencing is something that that really is the only tried and true way to keep deer from eating these brand new gardens that go in that often cost a lot of money. And of course, there are probably other ways for ticks to get into a garden, but that's one way for them to get into a garden. Deer fencing is extremely important when we're developing gardens initially. Once they get established, after a couple years, deer fencing can go away, and then the garden can actually tolerate a certain amount of browsing. Again, I'm sorry, we're changing the subject slightly, but deer are a big, big issue. And if the question hasn't come up, you know, all of the different things that we use to make them smell bad, make them taste bad. It's rained so much this year that applying those kind of products has been next to impossible. Deer still come in, they still eat plants. And so we are dealing with issues with municipalities that are putting up roadblocks to deer fences, even temporary deer fences. It's something that is a real issue, and it's something that maybe is a myth too, that we can create a garden that is deer proof. It's really hard to create a garden that's deer proof.
Great, thanks for that, and thanks for all of your answers. We have multiple questions about native grasses in landscaping, so maybe we can pivot to thinking about grasses. How do you incorporate them? Thoughts about if they can become more dominant than forbs, or other plants in a planting? I'd love to hear maybe Scott's thoughts first, and then anyone else who would like to jump in.
Sure. I think that the natural garden, the garden that that I think many of us are aware of and see in our neighborhoods, in our communities, those gardens that that kind of resemble nature or maybe resemble a natural grassland, um, are a real challenge to create. There aren't a lot of native grasses that um, that that don't spread around a lot. So creating that balance between forbs and grasses can be a challenge. Um, I know that using Indian grass is just, you shouldn't, because it's just going to take over everything. But even if you're in a dry environment and you use little blue stem will have a way of really digging in and crowding everything else out. The thing, even in gardens, I know this is important in ecological restoration or reconstruction of tallgrass prairies and grasslands. Even in gardens, it's really important to incorporate mycorrhizae into the landscaping. I know this is a very um, new and infant practice, but in my experience, I've found that forbs really become more resilient to grass invasion when they have mycorrhizae incorporated into the root zone. There are more companies that are selling mycorrhizae in Kansas City. Myco Bloom is creating, they're selling local ecotype mycorrhizae from the Midwest. There's a company in Pennsylvania that's marketing ecotypes from the East Coast. Bioorganics. I think that mycorrhizae are a really important part of well, nature and what makes a natural ecosystem function. And I think that it can be a part of how we practice gardening and create systems that are a little bit more in balance in terms of grasses versus forbs or grasses versus flowers.
Great, thank you. Other questions are, or we have some questions about how to keep taller wildflowers from falling over, or can we discuss that, how that can happen in plantings, and maybe dovetail that with pruning practices or any recommended pruning practices?
I guess I'll go. Yeah, so I mean, a lot of plants, you can do, what is it called? The Chelsea chop is what I've seen it called. And you can chop the plant down before it flowers, and that will stunt its growth a little bit, but still cause it to flower. I know it works. I haven't seen a list anywhere of the species it works well for and it doesn't. I don't know if anyone has one, and it can be sent to me and I guess everyone else. But that's one way to keep them from falling over. Also, just, you can put up, you don't have to like fence it, but you can just kind of put up some sort of little thing that just like a low fence of sorts, which just stops plants from coming, from flopping over. But also, I mean, be happy that our plants are tall this year. Like, we didn't have a drought, which was really exciting. So I say it's partially you can manage it, but it's also partially just understanding that these are native plants and a lot of them come from places like tallgrass prairies, and this is just how they want to behave. And as Eric and other people were talking about, we just have to kind of live with that a little bit.
I kind of want to echo what Nina is saying. Just from what I've seen from folks that already have a native garden established in their yards, they've come up with a few creative ways to keep their plants looking a little bit more tall and tidy and not necessarily just kind of flopping over. Most of which they just do hardscape, so adding in like a wildlife water feature or adding in strategically placed rocks here and there to keep things from tipping over. That's kind of what I've seen done just out here in Columbia, Missouri. Um, And with that being said, there are species that are just going to do their thing regardless. I'm thinking of cliff goldenrod, just it's going to flop over, it's going to happen. But there are creative solutions.
If I could just add a little bit to what Nina said, what you were describing is what I call spring haircuts. And so it's usually done on taller species that bloom in summer and fall. It's kind of hard to cut a spring blooming plant back and then it have enough energy to come back and bloom. It's also, if you cut a summer or a fall blooming plant right before it's moving into blooming, then you will starve it of energy and then it won't bloom. So I call it a spring haircut. It's usually done in the end of May or end of April or the beginning of May. That's the window where you can really be ruthless with plants, cut them all the way to the ground if you want, and they will come back up and bloom. The other thing is that spacing is everything. Conventionally, we space plants out too far apart and we have them living in islands of mulch, just oceans of mulch. And so I think that if we start practicing closer spacing as close as maybe even 15 or 16 inches apart, then we will start to see plant sizes stay smaller. We will see competition between individual plants. And when you have that kind of competition, then you do end up having plants that don't flop over.
Thank you. Let's think. We had some questions about insects, or, continuing to think about let's think about what species of plants do you associate most with their benefits for both pollinators, maybe your favorite pollinator attracting native plants, but also had a question about those beneficial predatory insects like lacewings and ladybugs. So maybe Eric, you can hop in, and then we can go from there, and Nina as well.
Sure. Well, first I want to start off by saying that I mean, we've got fall approaching here, and we're going to have fewer blooms the deeper we get into fall. So how can we still see insects flying around, especially bees and wasps? Well, they're going to aphid colonies. Aphids we tend to associate as being pests, but they fulfill a really important niche in really early spring and late fall when there aren't a lot of blooms left, because they feed on plant sap and it's not very nutritious, and so they have to imbibe an inordinate amount of plant sap, and they consequently poop out a lot of liquid waste that is called honeydew. And this waste is really sugary and makes up for the lack of nectar that is out there from flowers that aren't blooming any longer. So the next time you think about eliminating your aphid colonies, remember that they have an important role, again, especially in early spring and late fall when there aren't a lot of flowers around. But as far as plants go, milkweed, I think, is overrated, to be honest with you. It has a way of pollination that not a lot of insects can deal with because they're not pollen grains, they're packaged. And so it takes a very strong insect to pick up one of those packets, extricate it without getting stuck, sometimes fatally, and take it to another plant. And there's a minimal number of insects that can execute that in milkweed. Yuccas are a really interesting plant if you enjoy night blooming flowers. They're pollinated exclusively by moths called yucca moths, but there's a whole suite of other insects that use those blossoms as well. And they won't send up a spike every year, but most years they will, and they are native to this part of the country. Sunflowers, really excellent plants. Again, a fair number of plants besides flowers have extra floral nectaries. That means places where they exude a sweet substance that's attractive to insects that's not the flower. And sunflowers do this in a number of body parts on the plant. Oh, I just said body parts for plant. That doesn't make a lot of sense. But anyway, yeah, so composites, your most diverse pollinators will go to flowers that are white in color or yellow. They like umbels, that's the umbrella shaped flowers, or racemes, that's the conical shape arrangements of flowers, or composites. And they do this because it takes less energy to go from one flower to another in exchange for the amount of energy they're getting out of that visit. They also like to be able to see around them when they're foraging. And lastly, most insects do not have a long proboscis like butterflies and moths and or a long tongue like some bees have. So they need a really short corolla. So there's not a lot of insects that will visit, deep flowers or flowers that are spaced widely apart on the plant. So those are the kind of characters you might want to look for when selecting plants.
So first, I'll give a plug for the Grow Native top 10 lists. I think those are fantastic lists of plants and they have, I mean, I guess Amanda or Lily, you can talk more about this, but they have lists of 10 plants for pollinators, 10 spring plants, 10 fall plants. They're just these really good lists of plant species. My favorite plant is hairy mountain mint, which is Pyganthynum pilosum. You rub the leaves and they smell like toothpaste. Which is fun, but also you just see a huge diversity of bees and also wasps on it. It's long blooming, it's relatively well behaved. It's a great plant for providing resources for a huge diversity of insects.
Excellent. Any other thoughts or specific species call outs for our pollinators? I mean, native plants benefit pollinators across the board in many different ways. But if Scott or Sajo, if you have a specific species, you're welcome to call it out.
Yeah, well, it's not really a species per se, it's more of a genus, but oaks as a genus. I was reading Doug Tallamy's book and he mentioned specifically oaks. I believe they host, I want to say it's over 900 species. That might be wrong, but something around there. So, I mean, incredible. So oaks as a genus for sure. And then as a personal favorite, I love buttonbush. Anytime I'm near a buttonbush, I can hear the buzzing. The bees are just going crazy. So that is my personal favorite that I love to see anytime I'm out and about at people's yards.
I would endorse both of those suggestions, mountain mint and buttonbush. Buttonbush may take a lot more water than a lot of yards can provide, unfortunately, because we'd love to have some in our yard, and I think it's way too dry. But again, yeah, those racemes that mint have and the ball that buttonbush has, yeah, 100%.
Great. Thank you. I'll switch over to this question, which is about diversity of plants in your native planting, or diversity of plants versus abundance of plants. Would you say it's better to have 10 individuals of 5 species or 5 individuals of 10 species? It's a simplified question, but getting at this idea of how many species do we need in a planting in order for it to be effective. Maybe Nina, but anyone's welcome to come in.
Yeah, it's a kind of $1 million question. And I would say the thing is are you thinking about now? Or are you thinking about in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? Like all the plants you have are going to grow and get bigger and spread out. I don't think there's any perfect number. Definitely you need some sort of, aggregation, usually to attract pollinators and things like that. But putting in one tiny stalk now is going to be larger in a few years. So you really have to think about the temporal component. I would say the best thing you can do is just really make sure you have species that are in bloom across the growing season, because it's nice to have a huge bloom in the summer and it can be really beautiful, but then you don't really have any resources during the rest of the year. So really just trying to have flowers that are in bloom across the growing season is really important.
I'd like to put a plug in for this this concept of planting close together. I mentioned it once before, but I also think I've noticed and observed that in my small 225 square foot savanna planting and seeding in my backyard, that I have over 24 species of plants that are surviving in it. All came in from seed. I have probably 400 or 500 seedlings that have that are maturing in this area after 2 growing seasons. When I see gardeners planting, 225 square feet with, say, 30 plants, maybe 5 species, I see a lot of flowers eventually, but I don't see the diversity. And I really do think that we can, as gardeners, embrace seeding as a method of creating a garden. It takes a completely different way of thinking about gardening. It's a practice that typically doesn't get taught in horticulture, but I found it to be extremely satisfying, extremely successful, and in a way to get an incredible amount of diversity, incredible number of individuals. And by the way, it is completely full of pollinators and herbivores, insect herbivores, just completely packed. I'm surprised every single day that I go out there. Great potential for planting things or seeding things very, very close together.
Awesome. Thank you. A question here is one of the common myths that I hear repeated frequently is that converting native plants requires no maintenance. How do you approach a conversation with someone who's interested in native plants because they've heard that they require less work? And yeah, any thoughts you have related to that? Maybe we can start with Scott, and Sajo is welcome. Anyone is welcome.
Well, I mean, less work really depends on the style of the garden. A conventional garden is going to take upwards of 8 to 10 minutes per square foot per year to maintain. Do the math on that. It's a lot of maintenance. Whereas the very opposite end of the spectrum, the seeded landscape that I just described very briefly, might take 30 seconds or 40 seconds per square foot per year to maintain. That seeded landscape that I created, that 225 square foot, I call it my trampoline garden because it's an old trampoline that we inherited when we bought this house 3 years ago, was seeded. And the first year it came in with tons of weeds, and I had to weed. Maintenance was through the roof. There was so much weeding to be done. It was such a challenge. It took so much time to keep those weeds out and to encourage those seedlings to survive. This year, year 2, after spending hundreds of hours last year, I'm spending 20 minutes for the whole year to keep the weeds out. It has been the most eye-opening gardening venture of my life. And so I really think that you can attain stability in a garden, but you need the right amount of plants, the right amount of plants spacing, and having plants crowded together is a good way to get to that position of stability where you have a green mulch, plants that actually mulch the ground themselves, crowd out the sunlight, and crowd out weeds as well. But it takes a while, and it takes a lot of hard work to get to that point.
Yeah, I wanted to echo what Scott was saying. I think a lot of folks think of native gardens and they think it's completely 100% unmaintained, but native gardens are not unmaintained. They are just maintained in a little bit of a different way. And for the first year, while the plants are getting established, usually you might have to do at least some maintenance. I mean, you might have to do like supplemental watering if your plugs are getting too dry. You might have to weed, like Scott was saying. If you have a very specific look that you're going for, you might have to prune. So you certainly do have to maintain a native garden, but in general, native gardens are lower maintenance than the non-native gardens, but you still will have to do site prep, weeding, pruning, things like that. So there is some maintenance involved in a native garden for sure.
And one of the things I run into the most is my neighbors have honeysuckle and clematis, and I'm in the city, so the lots are really close. So I would say one thing you can also do is talk to your neighbors and like really advocate for them to try to, you know, take down some of their non-native plants, because those non-native invasive ones, like they'll find their way into anything. So the more people you can get to recognize those as non-native invasive plants and remove. I mean, I even just pulled clematis down for my neighbor. I texted them and I was like, hey, can I pull this down? Because it's less work for me to pull and weed their garden than it is to deal with all the seedlings later. So especially within urban areas where the houses are really close together, it's not necessarily, you can try to do everything you can for your garden, but you're also with among other people. So trying to convince them to you know, maintain some of their non-native plants that are going to give you headaches can definitely be worthwhile in the long run.
Great, thank you. We have a question here. We've had multiple questions about attracting other types of animals to your yard, like more dragonflies or more reptiles or more amphibians or toads. Can anyone speak to success or, you know, recommendations for that? And maybe in the same answer, we can also hit that point again, the misconception with native plant gardens and how they might attract unwanted animals, which we addressed earlier with ticks, but I think this is all related. So anything that can help maybe dragonflies or amphibians.
Well, dragonflies spend most of their life in water. So if you want dragonflies, the best thing to do is provide a water feature. And it doesn't take much. We have a little pond in our backyard that's maybe 40 gallons. And we have, last year we had a darner dragonfly ovipositor in there. I mean, it wasn't going to make it through the winter, but it just goes to show how little water it takes to attract things. But you know, the downside is that if you know, I mean, dragonflies are predators as nymphs as well under the water, so they're eating mosquito larvae and things like that, which is good. But they can't eat all the mosquito larvae, so you have to weigh that with you know with your tolerance for biting flies maybe. But there's no real you know dragonflies will also fly far away from water, and they typically will have feeding swarms over big open fields. So, but they'll also roost at night, and so we've had them roosting in our yard. I know that. So, it's really hit and miss for something. You really can't attract dragonflies unless you have a water feature. But and as far as amphibians, I would say probably the same thing. I mean, where we're at, I don't expect us to ever have amphibians, but you never know. You know, we have snakes in our yard for sure, and I know they feed on amphibians, so maybe they're finding them somewhere. Um, but that's about all I can speak to that from my personal experience.
I did want to kind of touch on the myth of like native gardens attracting certain mammals, certain nuisance pests. I think that kind of comes again from the kind of the myth that native gardens are just unkempt, completely unmaintained. Usually, specifically when I hear that about the native or nuisance pests, people are normally talking about rodents, specifically mice and rats. And usually those guys are looking for two things, food and shelter. So specifically with the shelter, any dense vegetation that provides a lot of just protection will be attractive to rodents. But that dense vegetation doesn't necessarily have to just be native. You can have a garden that's completely full of non-native species, and if it's very dense and lush and has a ton of shelter for those rodents, they're going to be attracted. So they're not necessarily specifically seeking out native plants. They're just seeking out somewhere to hide, whether that's native or not. And with them looking for food as well, for the folks that are in more of a cityscape, you might have things like trash blow into your yard that will attract rodents. If you have a compost pile in your backyard with food scraps, that's certainly going to attract rodents. Some folks sometimes will leave out pet food overnight. That will also attract rodents. So it's not necessarily that native gardens themselves are attracting rodents. It's very nuanced. And there's certain variables. There's certain things that you can do as well. You can make sure that your compost pile isn't accessible. Other folks will try to make their gardens not as dense, so they'll mulch in between each plant. So there's certain things that you can do to sort of prevent nuisance pests, but it's not specifically the native plants attracting those pests to your yard.
Awesome, thank you. I have a question here about, or we can shift now to think about city ordinances and how to help your native garden.
Okay, city ordinances. It seems like she
Yeah,
just froze.
yep, Lily just froze for a second there, but I'm sure
Okay.
she'll be back online in a second. I see the question
Right.
because both of us are in it. What are your perspectives on or your experiences navigating city ordinances that can be punitive against native landscapes, create red tape that people and hoops that people have to jump through in order to be able to establish native landscapes and educate others on them?
I'll just say it's an ongoing battle. In St. Louis County, this just happened. There's some really good native plant ordinances in specific municipalities. Then something came up at the county level to kind of remove some of the protections for native plantings. And it was really a groundswell of support from organizations such as Grow Native, which really spearheaded it. And I think they were able to get the legislation kind of tabled for now. So there's been a lot of municipalities that have had success and support, but there is a lot of misconceptions about native plants. Some of these, alder persons or whatever governing body, they get calls, and often someone complaining about a native plant garden, and it's usually the person complaining doesn't really know what they're talking about. The elected official doesn't really know what they're talking about. And all of a sudden native plants become the scapegoat for something that isn't have to do with native plants. So there's definitely been a lot of success. There's some really good research on it as well about lawn ordinances and native plant ordinances across the country that I encourage anyone who's trying to pass one to look into. But you always have to remain vigilant because there has been, things where people are trying to roll them back. I know I was involved with one where they decided that the native plant, or we're trying to say the native plant ordinance only applied during the summer, and therefore during the winter, all the plants needed to be cut back because the language was unclear. So really trying to make sure if you're trying to enact an ordinance to make it specific and try to, add language, protecting the native plants all year long is really important.
I'd like to talk about a couple things. It seems like the cases that I've been involved with where people have been cited for their landscapes have been situations where people have a landscape style that that looks forgotten, that looks like it's not being taken care of. And so I think that in just about every case, it's always comes from a complaint from a neighbor. And so my way of looking at it and the way that Wild Ones National has looked at it historically is that neighborliness is way more effective. Being a good neighbor. And there have been many instances where people have used some simple things in a garden that make the garden look intentional. One is actually going out there and being present in the garden, weeding, doing various things that look like you're gardening. You actually are gardening. Having buffers and frames around natural gardens is a really good way to dress it up. Having benches, walkways, artwork, and then also your style can have something to do with whether it's accepted in the neighborhood. Also, being neighborly by chatting with your neighbors, being friendly with your neighbors is another good way to um, really get away with murder in a lot of cases, because I've seen some incredibly wild gardens in some neighborhoods, and nobody seems to complain because the homeowner is just so friendly and outward with everybody, and nobody's going to, anyway. So the other thing is that this issue with fencing, so you can't have a fence in a lot of communities that is over 6 feet high. A deer fence is not effective if it's 6 feet high. And so um, there have been some of my customers have gotten in trouble with their municipalities, communicating with everybody, your neighborhood association, with your community leaders about the way that you are trying to create something that's meaningful and diverse and beautiful, but that you need a temporary fence. I think 2 or 3 years of having a fence installed is a great way to get a garden to establishment. But if everybody realizes that it's something that is only going to be temporary, it's only going to be for a while, then I think that reason does prevail. If it doesn't prevail and you are stuck and need to create a fence that's lower than 6 feet, you can create two 6 foot fences that are 5 feet apart, and that will keep a deer from jumping over the fence. The neighbors will hate it because it will look horrible, but it will work, and you will not be in violation of any fence ordinance.
Excellent. Thank you. We now have a question about, or I want to make sure we hit this question about overwintering and winter preparation for plants and or for our native gardens, and we'll send out our stratification guide and preparation guide. But can we talk about the native planting in the not growing season? What are the highlights? Any maintenance that we need to be doing then?
I was giving my colleagues a chance to chime in there. I don't want to take over the mic, but winter is my favorite season. And leaving seed heads in the winter is enjoyable, I think, in terms of human attraction. Um, but it's also critical for lots of critters that are trying to survive winter. Mice will scamper up coneflower heads and chew them off and drop them to the ground, and then feed on the seed heads during winter. They'll forage for those seeds and store them in their dens. Same thing happens with black-eyed Susans uh, with 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 mice. Birds will be pecking on the roughly 5% of seed that remains stuck on a blazing star stem through winter. On mountain mints, on all of the composites, they all hold on to some seeds into winter. So it's really important to hold on to those stems, let them stand all winter long, because when there's snow on the ground, which is I know rare, birds are foraging on all of those plants, and they are really lifesavers through snowy winter periods.
Eric, you want to talk about overwintering insects?
I honestly don't pay a lot of attention over the winter. I mean, yeah, our own yard is kind of messy. We have a lot of leaf litter that we leave, and we have a great big pin oak in our front yard that habitually drops limbs. And if they're small enough, I'll throw one of the, a section of one of those into the flower bed too, and insects will get into that, start breaking it down into soil that's and enrich the soil that way too. So I think it's kind of, as much as you can emulate the natural ecosystem. Go for a walk in your local, wild park and see what that looks like. That might be a good idea of gauging how your yard might supposed to be look like over the winter. Um, we don't. Yeah, I'm glad you talked about cutting things off because I don't think we do that either until maybe once spring starts to happen. So I appreciate that hint of not cutting flower heads off. But when you do, then those hollow stems, those dry hollow stems from last year will be places for some bees and solitary bees and solitary wasps to nest in. And you'd be surprised how tiny the cavity has to be for some of these tiny bees and wasps to take advantage of it. So yeah, I mean, again, too, it has to do with your own aesthetic too.
And this might be slightly off topic, but I've heard that there's a myth that native gardens look boring in the winter. And that's not the case, at least from what I've seen. I think a lot of native plants can look quite lovely in the wintertime, specifically native grasses. They kind of maintain their structure, so they have a lot of visual interest, at least vertically. And certain species like Christmas fern will retain their beautiful green color even in the winter. So it's nice to look at. So it doesn't even have to be um, a native garden doesn't have to be boring. You certainly have a lot of room to play with. And I think what Eric was saying too, like it is up to kind of what you want to see for your own garden aesthetically.
It was mentioned earlier, other elements like benches and artwork and things like that can also perk up your garden over the winter. It gives, optics on things that might distract from whatever might be turning people off.
For sure. And to touch on that super quick, I did go to a house for one of my consultations, and they actually had, I believe it was like a log that just happened to look like two legs. So if you can think of a person like in the ground with the legs poking up, and they actually would dress it up depending on the season. So for like wintertime around Christmas, they would put like Christmassy type of clothes on the log. For other seasons, they would put like different shoes and things. Sometimes they'd have Crocs. They might actually be in like listening to this webinar. So if you know who you are, if I'm talking about you, but I thought that was pretty lovely as well. Just having that sort of quirky visual interest that's unique to your yard.
Great, thank you. So I'll do two more questions. This second to last is hitting, we've had a couple of questions hitting on the concept of how a planting may need to be mowed. Can we elaborate on this idea? When is it necessary to mow? And how does one, are we talking about a riding lawnmower? How does a homeowner do that?
I mean, I've never mowed my native plants, so that's my 2 cents. I guess it depends. If you have a very large space and you're trying to like establish kind of more natural prairie, it might be beneficial to mow at some point, but I think for most urban gardens, you don't have to mow.
Yeah, I'm a little there are very few landscapes that are maintained with a mower. One of which is ground cover planting of sedges. You can't actually mow those because the crown of the plants are below ground level. You can't do that with other grasses because they have like prairie dropseed has a kind of a hummock that sticks up when they get bigger. You can't mow that. Yeah, on seeded landscapes, uh, can be mowed, but usually not with a lawnmower because so rank and tall, and you kind of need a bigger piece of equipment to mow something like that. You could rent a billy goat from Home Depot and mow it with that.
Great, thank you. And the question that we'll end with is um, a, a significant one of, this, they just wrote big question that I know doesn't have an easy answer, but how much needs to be done to make a lasting impact for positive change to help our pollinators and rewild our lawns? I know each individual can make an impact, but how big of a scale are we looking at to reverse damage that's been done? So maybe thoughts about connectivity or how many gardens we may need in the landscape. Maybe Nina, but Scott and Eric, you're welcome to chime in as well.
I'd say what you feel capable of. Don't bite off more than you can chew. Do what you can within your means, within your time, within your interest. Every time you put it in a garden and people see it, and it changes the belief that a garden, I would say a yard, not even a garden, needs to be perfectly mowed grass with like maybe 2 evergreen shrubs, makes a difference. So do whatever you can, and that can be beneficial.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And maybe you're not able to do it physically, or maybe you still don't have the knowledge like I don't. uh, uh, that doesn't mean it can't happen. I mean, there's more and more businesses cropping up that are jumping on this bandwagon and starting to accelerate it. And I look at, forgive me for shouting out to someone who's not in Missouri, but Benjamin Vogt, Vogt. If you have not heard of him, please look him up. He's a very eloquent writer, but his major business is in native landscaping, not just for homeowners, but at a larger scale for industrial parks, business parks, this kind of thing. So that's the kind of momentum we need to keep going. And so by example, you're showing that this can be done, and you're recruiting your neighbors, maybe, hopefully, and then you're taking it to the next level after that. But I think we're still in the infant stages of this movement. So, I think it's progressed faster already than I was expecting it to. So I think there's a lot of reason to believe this is not just a fad or something. This is going to become an ongoing and accelerated way of addressing ecosystem rehabilitation. So there's multiple ways you can approach this, and encourage your nurseries and your landscaping businesses in your area to adopt this as one method of landscaping.
I would like to add that everybody has a different opinion about how a landscape should look or how it looks. And, the whole spectrum of what landscapes look like can be very conventional, very, a lot of high maintenance. On the other side of the spectrum can be very wild, very natural, and everything in between. I think that we need, as educators, as people that are interacting with people in the community, we need to be meeting people wherever they are, wherever they choose to garden. Because, I look around my neighborhood and I don't see a lot of gardens everywhere. And so if anybody makes an attempt to do gardening in their landscape, I think that we need to commend them, whatever they're doing, because it's something, and then we need to bring them along slowly, introducing different ideas and concepts about gardening. Everybody has a different style. There's nothing wrong with anybody's style. We just need to be very open and very, just kind of meet people and help them along the way.
Excellent. Thank you to our panelists. I appreciate your wisdom that you shared with us today. Thank you all. If you have any last remarks, you're welcome to share them, and Amanda will usher us out. But thank you all.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lily, and to today's panelists. Also, thank you so much to our generous Grow Native sponsors during the year 2025. I also want to circle back around to our panelists at the end and give you guys an opportunity to give any announcements that you have for yourselves. But before we get to that, I have a couple of announcements about upcoming in-person and online events for MPF and Grow Native. So first of all, I want to say I'm looking forward to seeing everybody who is registered for our annual dinner and silent auction happening this Saturday. It's going to be held at the Stony Creek Hotel in Columbia, Missouri. If you missed the registration deadline for this year and celebrating Prairie with drinks, food, speakers, and cool outdoorsy products sounds like fun, keep an eye out for promotion in next year's e-news and socials in July. Next, we have a few upcoming in-person events that have hit capacity, but you are welcome to email me at outreach@mowprairie.org to be added to the waiting list for them. One is the $25 Introduction to Missouri Fern Identification and Ecology Workshop in Jefferson City on Saturday, August 22nd, and the other one is the free Grow Native 25th Anniversary event, multi-stop certified home garden tour in Columbia, Missouri on Sunday, August 23rd with Como Wild Yards. Our next webinar is going to take place on Wednesday, August 27th. You can register now and join MPF Director of Operations Emily Gustafson and MPF Vice President of Science and Management Bruce Schutte for a virtual hike on Pennsylvania Prairie. The hike, filmed in June, is a great example of summer on the prairie. This webinar will include a live Q&A for your questions with Emily and Bruce. Finally, make plans to attend MPF and Grow Native plant sales happening this fall, beginning on September 6th in Columbia, Missouri at the local Bass Pro. Vendors from all sales will donate a portion of plant sale proceeds to benefit MPF. A flyer for the sales will be included in tomorrow's follow-up email, along with a summary of these announcements. You can find registration for all other upcoming in-person events and tours at grownative.org/events and mowprairie.org/events. We hope that you join us again for webinars and events this fall. And now, before we say goodbye, I want to give a moment if any of our panelists wanted to give a shout out and say goodbye and a little bit more themselves.
My new book, Bug Watching, is available from Princeton University Press or whoever your favorite bookseller is. Thank you for allowing me to say that.
Absolutely.
I appreciate all of you here. I hope the panelists get a copy of some of these resources too, so that we can use them ourselves or distribute them to others. Thank you.
I guess for me, if anyone is interested in the Como Wild Yards program, please just search up. I'm pretty sure if you just search on Google Como Wild Yards program, it should lead to a page with a Google form on how to contact me and adding information about your yard. But we offer technical assistance, and we also are offering now cost sharing as well. So we have financial assistance. So if there's anything that you would like funded, we might be able to help. So just go through that Google form, it'll go straight to me. And we still are open for this season. So really, I do consultations anywhere from about late April to I've done until early November, basically just until there's snow on the ground. I'm able to actually go out and meet people at their yards. So if anyone has any interest, please sign up.
I would like to just quickly give a huge shout out to the Grow Native program of the Missouri Prairie Foundation. I remember so many years ago when Carol David was thinking about, you know, taking it under the Prairie Foundation umbrella, and she, thought about it carefully and went for it. The Grow Native program has flourished under her leadership. I'm so excited to see where it's going. If you haven't gone to the Grow Native website to see all of the incredible resources that are there, there's no resource that's greater. And so huge shout out to this this great anniversary. What is it, Amanda? Is it 25?
It is our 25th year anniversary. You're correct.
Congratulations.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Scott. And then Nina, anything you want to share with everybody while you're still on the call with us?
Nothing to add. Go out and plant some plants. Look for some bugs.
Listen, it's really that simple, everybody. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. Everybody have a great evening and stay in touch. Bye.